Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. Sign up, subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the bell for notifications, comment down below, and upvote the video itself. We would appreciate it. In this week's episode of What You Talking About, Willis, we talk about spring games, specifically spring games, not necessarily spring practice, because I think we need to differentiate spring practice from spring game in the importance area. Now, I think the spring game, as it sits in inter-squad scrimmage, has lost all of its meaning. It means absolutely nothing. Used to, back in the day, 1985, 1995, when everything wasn't on TV, the spring game was your opportunity to see football during the spring. You go up there, you sit in the stadium, it's relatively warm outside. You watch some players that are coming back and you get that little fix that you needed to make yourself go until football season. But now, in the age of everything being on TV, that becomes less of an option because they don't tailgate in the Grove for the spring game. They just go to the scrimmage and watch what's going on. It doesn't have the same meaning as a fall Saturday in Oxford, Mississippi. So, if the game's on ESPN Plus, you watch it on ESPN Plus. That's what I did. There's no reason to absolutely go to the game, and honestly, no benefit for Ole Miss to have it because it's free admission at that point. It used to be like $5 back whenever I went to school. But now it's completely free admission because they're trying to get people in the stadium. Now, Lane Kiffin is the master. We're going to shift gears a little bit here. Is the master of taking a spring game and making it to where you can't really take anything from it. He aligns the rules in such a way that whenever you try to break it down, it's almost impossible to do. He's did that for the first 2 years by essentially making the whole wide receiver unit non-contact. It just is what it is. This year he did it by completely making the defense toothless, and don't do any opinions on the defense at this point because the rules were completely against him. 3 base defenses were called, like no blitzes except for the last play. I do like that they zero blitz the last play. And everybody knew exactly what was coming. Okay? So that he is a master of doing that because he knows it's on TV. But he needs to get work out of it. And there's things that we can take from the game other than the fact that the score. I do not even know what the score is of the game. Score was of the game. I just don't. It's just not important. It's not a real thing to me. It's not how I work. I think it needs to be understood that both teams were relatively evenly broken up, okay? And Jackson, Spencer, and Walker kind of was going against the same looks, if that makes sense. Now, the matchup problem of Michael Trigg at tight end, that's a little bit of a problem, but Spencer Sanders used the middle of the field, if you heard what we talked last section. He had the pass of the day doing just that. So whenever you go, like, comparatively to what's going on, I think there's a little bit of relevance that you can take from that. Other than that, it is essentially a 2-hour one-on-one period to where you're looking at offensive lineman and defensive lineman, you're looking at wide receiver and cornerback, tight end and safety and linebacker, running back and linebacker. All of those things are sitting in. You can look at the accuracy of the quarterback. You can look at how he is reading the defense, not necessarily the progression, but you can understand, like, if they're not using a certain segment of the field. That is how you watch a spring game. That is how that gets to be important. That is why this game is probably more meaningful as essentially a 15th practice. But the game itself honestly doesn't need to really happen. The game's just there to get that fix, and you could still do that. And I think it was Hugh Freeze that talked about after his spring game, it would be better if they could just play somebody. And I think that is kind of the future of the spring game, because as it sits right now in the stadium, it's kind of a non-factor. It just is. There's going to be people that go and there's going to be people that do that, but it's just a non-factor. The result of the game doesn't matter. All of these things and all of these, prefixes essentially have to be taken into account for this game. It's like, hey, this person played a good game at quarterback, but this person played a good game at wide receiver, but, we can't really judge the defense because they weren't allowed to tackle to the ground. Stuff like that. If you play somebody in a real game at the end of spring, it doesn't have to be necessarily a good team. Have UT Martin come down here. Have Southern Miss come up here. Have Jackson State come up here. If you do that, that will serve as a better benchmark for your team. You can actually get a view of how offense and defense kind of works going into the fall. And I understand that they want to be secretive, and most of the time they're right, but Lane Kiffin is running the same offense he's run at Ole Miss for 4 years. There's tape on it. The spring game's not going to make any difference. It's just not. Pete Golding's been coaching Alabama defense for 5 years. Everybody has been trying to break down that defense. They have an idea of what they do. We're going to do the same thing. It's not necessarily state secrets. I understand why they do it, but it just kind of is what it is. But if you played a real team and you play a real game, all of a sudden you can get an idea of where your holes really are. See, that's the catch in spring practice. You're doing a lot of thud. You're doing a lot of just basically essentially two-hand touch. There's not so much full contact that happens because you don't want to get your players hurt. So if you had one game to where you just rotated in and out, everybody got 25 plays, you played the whole roster against an FCS team, you could see where your holes on your roster likely would be before the spring transfer portal window. And you could pay these FCS schools the money that they would get for coming up here in the fall, and they could be removed from the fall schedule. They still get the money. You still get to help football out. You don't have to play them during the season, which absolutely drives us crazy, especially the teams that play an FCS team like the second week in November. It's just an absolute pain. But as it sits now, whenever the scheduling gets turned over, I'm fully expecting FCS, G5, Power 5 to remain on the schedule. The lesser buyout of the two Power 5 or group of 5 teams that are scheduled every year, that is the team that is going to get dropped. It just is what it is. So I'm pretty excited. I mean, you can probably hear from the tone of my voice, but spring games need to be taken with the respect that they give. They are honestly not needed as an event. They're a relic of a bygone era as an event. They are relevant in the fact that those practices are relevant. And in order for players to hit where they want to be and where they need to be going into the fall, spring is necessary to do that. Otherwise, you're dealing with like 9 months taking time off, and it would take a whole lot of time, whole lot of extra time to get kind of ready to go. But spring games, I would like to see it evolve to be basically FCS teams. Spring games as it sits now, kind of useless. Doesn't matter. I want to ever ask score. I don't care about stats, and I don't care about attendance. All I care about are essentially one-on-one games that are happening on the field. And spring practices are unbelievably important because they serve as the point to pick the holes on your roster before the spring transfer portal window and to find out exactly what you have before the new class comes in. It's important. It's the development practices. It is where the kid that might not have been able to get on the field last year can work his way in to where in the fall he's working towards the rotation. It's the Latimer practices, if anybody watched the program. Anyway, thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. Every dayers tomorrow on the show, Bill Flowers will join us to talk about this game. I have an idea what he's going to say. I'm not 100% positive what's going to happen, but we'll be able to see exactly what he does. Tune in for that. But until tomorrow, thank you very much and have a good day.